Wonderful to see you. Thanks to those who have come back from the previous lectures, and I think there's some people here that are the first time, so we welcome you all. This is the third session of this Ross Smith lectureship. I am Jack Holland. I'm the professor of Pastoral Care and Counseling here at Emmanuel. I want to thank you, Calvin and Nancy, for your continued generosity in these biennial lectures and just making them possible. It's been a long time now that we've been doing this together. It has been a great honor and something that I had hoped for a long time to have Dr. Richard Beck with us for these lectures. Dr. Beck is professor at Abilene Christian University and for many students a favorite, including, by the way, my nephew. Dr. Beck is also a prolific author with 9 published works that are always thought-provoking and original. He's actually been an important resource for me for many years. When I have a new presentation or just need help to kind of think through something that's challenging, one of my go-to resources is Experimental Theology, Dr. Beck's blog. It's full of topics that you might never even think of. Just a few to illustrate how wide-ranging his interests are. There are posts like Bonhoeffer's Letters from Prison. He has posts on the theology of icons, one on moral psychology that some of you will take the human sexuality class. You might want to read ahead. He also has posts on the snake handling churches of Appalachia, and even posts on the theology of Calvin and Hobbes. In all of those posts, he never fails to enrich my understanding. His newest book, scheduled to be available in May, is titled The Book of Love, A Better Way to Read the Bible. I plan on reading that book. For this series of lectures, he's expanded on his most recently published book, The Shape of Joy, and in this lecture, he will speak on The Shape of Joy, Transcendence and Human Flourishing. Please help me welcome Dr. Beck.
Well, it's been such an honor to be with you. You've been a lovely audience. I've loved the Q&A. I always feel like I ramble on during the answer sessions, but thank you for your hospitality. And some of you have been with me, all 3. You've been how many, this is just, yeah, okay. So we're going to try to, some of you asked me if I'm going to be able to bring it home. We'll see. Lower expectations there, you know. But some of you, is this your first one? You're just popping in just now? Okay, so I'm going to do a recap a little bit and to kind of bring everybody, because I've been trying to tell a story, and I'll quickly recap that story and bring us up to speed. And I also know this is like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. How you feeling? Yeah, so I teach a statistics class at 8 o'clock. So if you fall asleep, I won't care. That part of me that cared died a long time ago. I just used to people falling asleep on me. I'm like, that's all right. You know, they'll come back around. You know, so if you fall asleep, it's all right. Okay. All right. So let me tell you the story and then bring us up to this. All right. The framing conversation of this entire lecture series was a conversation I had with a student named Brad, who was struggling with his faith, and I asked him the question, do you want to live a beautiful life? And so I've been using that question, do we want to live a beautiful life, to raise this question about transcendence and its role in our mental health. Began the conversation last night about mental health crisis. Despite economic affluence, if you look at dashboard indicators of how we're doing, rates of depression and suicide and anxiety, life satisfaction is going down, increased deaths of despair. What's going on with all of that? So last night I made this argument that one of the reasons, because we also in the Q&A talked about sociological reasons, the thinning out of social support resources. There's many things we could point to, but one of the things I pointed to was that our mental health has become increasingly self-referential. That, as I described it, we've been stuck in our heads. I blame these two guys for it, Sigmund Freud and Rene Descartes. A lot of sociologists think that things that happened in the modern era with Freud and Descartes were pivotal in causing us to turn inward, causing us to be skeptical and lose touch with the world around us. I had used Harmut Rosa and Martin Buber to talk about how we once had an I-thou, a personal relationship, a resonant relationship with reality, specifically the true and the beautiful and the good, that instead that has collapsed into an I-it relationship. I'm locked in my head, surrounded by inert objects, and so a relation of deadness has replaced that. We looked at Freud and how we turned away from the world and got locked inside of ourselves. Mental health has become self-referential. So that was the part of the story I told last night. This morning I said positive psychology was an attempt to try to turn us towards eudaimonia and value, a science, the good life. However, because positive psychology, being a scientific discipline, is neutral on the telos, or the purpose of the human life, it's trying to do the impossible. It's trying to give an empirical or factual or scientific account of value, which is you're stuck on the left side of this equation and not on the right side. And because positive psychology doesn't traffic in claims about the good or the telos of life, it suffers often hedonic capture. People define the good as what makes me happy or what satisfies me. And there are all these problems that are associated with that decision, suffering hedonic capture. So that brings us here to the final conversation, which is how human flourishing relates to transcendence. So the book that Jack mentioned, The Shape of Joy, has kind of one overarching theme that I argue that if you just gather up all the different threads of positive psychology, and you can enter this literature in many different ways, they all tend to kind of end up in the same location. They all tend pointing towards the mental health and flourishing flows from a relationship with transcendence. Or as I like to say, transcendence is you. If you're a religious person, I'll even say God is good for you. Transcendence is good for our mental health. Now, that's a claim, and what I want to do this afternoon is kind of make that claim. So what you're going to have to experience here is a bit of a lit review. I'm going to take you through many different literatures in positive psychology and describe how each literature kind of points towards transcendence. So on the left side, I want to call that like the empirical plane. That's the that is, you don't need to believe in God or the true or the beautiful or the good or transcendence or metaphysics. Okay, you can be a materialist, and that's for you on the left side. Okay. However, when we look at the literature on flourishing mental health, the things on the right side show up over and over and over again in the literature. But if you're on that side, you start needing to make a reference towards something more or beyond. That's what the word transcendence means. It just means to go beyond. And so that's what we're going to be walking through, how positive psychology keeps pointing us towards something beyond the empirical or the material frame. Some of this we have already experienced, so I'll just point out briefly. So on the empirical plane, we have these character strengths. So, you have social IQ, or you have a love of learning, or you are particularly brave and courageous. So from last lecture, like you might have certain skills or aptitudes, or genetic. But as I tried to point out this morning, virtues, though, demand a transcendent orientation toward the good. This is what Aristotle said when he wrote his Ethics. Aristotle said, every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that which towards which all things aim. But to traffic in the good means to traffic in normative value claims. And so if we just look at character strengths and treat the strengths as like your personality, we're on one side. But if you start talking about virtue, we start moving across into a conversation about a transcendental, the good, toward which we're traveling towards. Okay, we talked about how in the empirical plane, most times psychologists, when they study the good life, are actually studying satisfaction with life. But eudaimonia, translated as the good life, again, is trafficking in the transcendental of the good. So that was this afternoon. Last night, we were making a contrast between self-esteem and what psychologists call mattering or existential significance. You don't need to believe in any sort of transcendent good to traffic in self-esteem. Try to evaluate yourself well. How do you see yourself? How do you evaluate yourself? And as the literature has described, self-esteem tends to be very fatiguing, wearying. We get trapped in our heads with our loud egos, with the chatter, and it's an exhausting project. When we've looked at flourishing, we've discovered that there are people that believe in what's called cosmic or existential significance. Again, but the traffic in cosmic, so you're seeing psychologists grab for the word cosmic there, or existential mattering, they're trying to point to a value that is true, all right, that it's ontologically true, it's real, capital R real, your value, your dignity. But again, to posit such a thing is to move out of a scientific conversation into the realm of metaphysical claims. You just are worthy. That's just the truth of the matter. We also talked about the difference between relational mattering and that cosmic mattering. Same conversation, but again, you don't need a claim about transcendence to get interpersonal or relational mattering. Even an atheist could traffic in relational mattering to other people. But if you speak to cosmic mattering, and again, I mentioned this last night, when you look at the literature, what is more predictive of mental health, interpersonal, relational mattering, or cosmic mattering, the cosmic mattering is the one that is more predictive of positive mental health outcomes. So again, even on the issue of mattering, the one that points towards transcendence is the one that is most predictive of mental health. So I've already kind of talked about all of those. Let me keep pushing on down through the rest of the list. Let's talk about gratitude. So gratitude is a hot topic, as we know. When we look at the happiest people in the world, one of the things we notice about gratitude is how people tend to be very, very grateful. So let's pause and think about gratitude. What is the emotion of gratitude? Huh? Thankfulness. It's thankfulness, okay? And typically what prompts that feeling of thankfulness? By the way, this is a really easy question. I'm not looking for anything philosophical here. When do you say thank you? Yeah, when we receive a gift or a favor, we respond with thankfulness, okay? And apparently the happiest people in the world are in kind of a posture of mind where they are grateful or thankful for things. Now, when you look at gratitude, the research on gratitude, right, we can, most of the time, if somebody gives you something, a police officer pulls you over and doesn't give you a ticket, you're like, thank you. We're very grateful for that. Or you're turning in a paper and it's coming in late. I'm not talking about you guys, I'm talking about other people. And the professor goes, sorry this late. And they're like, it's okay. I'm not going to take off for it. You're like, thank you. Relational gratitude. We're grateful when people extend us a grace. But psychologists have also noticed something that they would call cosmic or existential gratitude, similar to our conversation about mattering. Who are you grateful to? Where do you express your relational gratitude for the sunset? Well, that's cheating. Yes, right? Where do we? But the point is, we experience existential or cosmic gratitude for being struck by nature or life itself. And the question there is, the point I want to point out psychologically is gratitude is a relational emotion. And so therefore, when I experience my life, a moment of awe or wonder or my next heartbeat or my next breath, and I feel that as a grace, because that's, Bible scholars, I'm correct that the word charis in the scripture, grace and gift are the same word, grace and gift. And so when I experience, right, a lovely autumn day as a gift, and I experience gratitude, that's cosmic gratitude. Because, but I guess it is relational. Back to the I-thou relationship, life resonates with me because I feel like I'm being addressed, I feel like I'm being given something, and all of life becomes transformed as an experience of gift or experience of grace. And we know that if you can get your head into that posture, we have better mental health outcomes. That's the magic of gratitude, how something in our life that can become a location of desolation can become like grace. So I think about my students, and who are my unhappiest students. They don't like living in Abilene. I was talking about Abilene last night. West Texas, it's an ugly town. Or they don't like their classes, or they don't like, So there's kind of a mental health trajectory there. But the that are very grateful, for where they live, and very grateful for the opportunity, they experience, all of a sudden, that entire experience goes from desolation to consolation. It becomes a location of resonance for me. And anything in your life can be that way. And that's kind of one of the saddest things about living in first world countries is how often our gratitude or appreciation of life tends to be based upon relative comparisons rather than absolute comparisons. Like one of the most toxic things you can reveal in a workplace is how much everybody makes, right? Administrators, you're like, amen. I recall I was the chair of my department, and I had a faculty member find out that somebody made $1,000 more than they made, okay? Even though the person had been there for many years. They still felt they worked just as hard, if not harder than that person, but it's $1,000, okay? And suddenly, I had a very highly dissatisfied and unhappy employee because of the relative comparison, right? Sadly, none of us walked into the bathroom today and went, you know what I'm grateful for? Indoor plumbing. When was the last time you said thank you for that? How many of you guys have been in the third world or on mission fields? You are grateful for indoor plumbing, are you not? Right? We don't, the things that we're indifferent to these things. But people can kind of say, I'm grateful for all of it, every little thing. My entire world shifts in that regard, and then I end up in this cosmic gratitude posture. But to do so, I have to kind of believe, at least emotionally, that I'm in a posture of relationality with existence itself. It's not inert or dead. It is rather giving gifts, and has given me gifts. And so when I practice gratitude, I enter into that relationship. The way I describe it in one of my books is like you can't be an atheist and experience cosmic gratitude, at least not emotionally. Mentally, you might deny the existence of God, but if you're experiencing gratitude for sunsets and life itself, you've entered into a relationship with the world. That there's an I-thou relationship there. So let's talk about hope. Big area of hope research in psychology. As you probably know, hope is really predictive of good, positive outcomes. Facing diagnoses or facing challenges in life, being hopeful. And probably the most significant theory on hope is Snyder's hope theory. Am I familiar with Snyder's hope theory? Okay. Brief crash course on hope. Snyder proposes that hope is comprised of two things, pathway and agency. Okay? Pathway. If I can see a route to the desired outcome, right, a path, I have hope. I can see a way to get there. All right? But that's not all of it. Then there's agency. Do you have what it takes? Do you have the resources? And they might be physical resources. There might be financial resources. Do you have the agency or the capacity to walk the pathway? And if you have both, there's a pathway to the outcome and agency and capacity, then I have hope. If I have capacity but no pathway, there's no hope. So a student might be like, okay, sorry to lean into the teacher examples, but a student comes to me and says, is there any way? Is there any way I can pass this class? And they might have the agency. Right? It might be a really smart student. If I would give them, if there was a path, they have the capacity to walk it. They got enough time and talent to do it. But at this point, you're like, no pathway. There's no hope here. Okay. Now you might say, no, maybe it is an agency. So you might there is a path, but you have to get 100% on the next test. And they're like, I don't think I can see the mathematical possibility. There's a thin bit of hope, but I lack the agency to accomplish it. So not a lot of hope. But if there's a path, and you think you can do it, you become hopeful. And this has been really powerful to psychotherapy. So for those of you that are involved in pastoral counseling, or even just working with your children or yourself, you can help people with hope by thinking through pathways. What are all the different ways you can make this happen? You can brainstorm pathways. What do you want out of life? Yeah, there might be this way and you might be stuck, but that's not the only way to get to your goals. And so a lot of therapy is helping people come up and brainstorm about pathways. And the other thing is then they kind of rehabilitate them on the capacity side. You can do this, self-efficacy, confidence. And if you can't do it, let's get you, what do you need to do or acquire or learn, or what credential opens the door to get to where you want to go. So you can work both sides of the equation, and when we do that, we see really good therapeutic outcomes. Hope becomes a therapeutic outcome, and I can increase hope. That is what I'm saying is realistic hope. But in the literature, anytime you delve into the literature on hope, there's always this little restlessness out there about what I might call, some literature reviews would call it radical hope, or hope when there is no hope, radical hope. Because that radical hope has moved us from one side to the empirical to the metaphysical, right? If there's no empirical hope, is there a hope that comes from the outside? And so instead of radical hope or metaphysical hope, I've used a word from J.R.R. Tolkien. He wrote a book about little small people called hobbits. You guys know this story? Has anybody read J.R.R. Tolkien's famous essay on fairy stories? Anybody read? Okay. And on fairy stories, Tolkien is giving an apology for fairy stories as serious adult literature. And he says fairy stories do a couple of things. They help us recover our love of the world. So there's recovery. There's also a consolation that we find. But there's also a part of it is what he calls the eucatastrophe. Eu meaning the good, and catastrophe meaning kind of a cataclysm. So the eucatastrophe is the good catastrophe, okay? It is the hope from outside the bounds of possibility, a hope that comes from beyond a realistic accounting of the situation. Do you all know what is the famous cry in The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits that signals the onset of eucatastrophic hope? I know the famous line. Any Tolkien nerds here? The eagles are coming. So in the books, whenever like all hope is lost and we're going to lose, in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, there's this cry, it's the eagles are coming. And that's typically the sign of a hope beyond possibility breaking into our world. And psychology doesn't know what to do with that. What is a hope that is, let's go back to Snyder for a second, where agency, capacity is the engine of hope, where in faith, our faith tradition and others, where it's when you get to the end of your capacity that the conversation about hope really begins. You can even think about like the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program is premised upon you have no agency. Are you familiar with the 12-step programs? So step one, right? We admitted that our lives have become unmanageable, that we're powerless, right? We come to the end of ourselves. And so it begins with like no agency, anymore. And then second step is came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that can restore us to sanity. So that we are definitely on the other side of this line, okay? Because agency is evaporated, and the only pathway here is a power greater than myself that as many churches will say, God finds a way when there is no way. I also lean into, as somebody who's a prison chaplain, and I come back to over and over again, is Ezekiel in the Valley of Dry Bones. Because that's the end of realistic hope, right? Ezekiel standing in the Valley of Dry Bones. There's no potential, no pathway, no agency, just deadness. And the Lord asks Ezekiel, Son of man, can these bones live again? And he's like, only you know. And he says, prophesy over the bones. That's powerful out of the prison ministry because a lot of these men don't see any realistic pathway out. And for some of them, there is no pathway out because they're in there for life. Like, they are literally in a cul-de-sac. They're not getting out. And so hope vanishes. There is no pathway to freedom here or to the life that I want. And so I'm kind of stuck here. So the hope they're looking for is very much a Valley of Dry Bones moment. I don't see a way out of this situation. How can I infuse this life with meaning and purpose and hope? Eucatastrophic hope or a radical hope. Now, I have this debate in my classes. I want to be clear here. There is a pastoral discernment issue here when you start trafficking in metaphysical, radical hope. Can we give people false hope? So there is, I want to be clear about this, but when we start trafficking in miracles and a catastrophic hope, that there are discernments that have to be made when we think about that. And so we often will deal with like case studies. If somebody has a terminal diagnosis, should you tell them it's terminal or should you give them hope? Because hope is powerful. And if you pull it from somebody, there will be consequences for that. But you also don't want to give false hope. So I just want to say there's a long conversation to be had about once you start getting out of the possible into the impossible. And yet we know believing in the impossible has powerful mental health consequences. Okay, let's talk about joy. There's a debate. So my book is called The Shape of Joy. There's a debate about joy. Some psychologists study joy just as a positive emotion. They just call it positive affect. And you guys know this confusion as well, like what gives you joy? And you're like, well, my cat gives me joy. Watching sports gives me joy. There are many things that give us joy, and we can catalog those things and inventory those things. And as much as we want, we can bring more of those things into our lives. Things that just makes me happy, makes me joyful. And that's legitimate. I want to be clear about that. But joy is a positive emotion, as I described earlier, suffers from the possibility of hedonic capture. I'm just constantly chasing something that makes me feel good and makes me happy. There's another definition in the literature where joy is described as a what's called a self-transcendent emotion. So cosmic gratitude would be a self-transcendent emotion. Joy can be a self-transcendent. Awe, which we'll get to here in a second, is a self-transcendent. Radical hope is a self-transcendent. So there are these, and love is a self-transcendent emotion. So love and hope and a peace that passes understanding and a joy that is resilient. Somebody was asking me recently, what is the difference between, right, joy is a positive emotion and joy is a transcendent emotion? And I said, the difference is the word regardless. Regardless, right? That's a transcendent, like regardless. The other one is contingent, right? Dependent on environment. It's a joy, that is triggered by the onset of a pleasurable stimulus. But a joy regardless means I could be standing in a rubble, but regardless, I'm still able to make a move towards joy, which is a very different emotion. And then obviously wonder as a transcendent, and even reverence. So, right, those are, y'all with me on that? There's happy and surprised and sad and fearful and anxious. Those are your regular emotions that are reactive to the environment. And that's typically how an emotion is defined. It's typically information about the environment. Something happens that makes me scared. Something happens that makes me happy. Something happens that makes me, angry. I'm typically triggered by the environment, and emotions are sending me information about what that event is. But the transcendent emotions are maybe context or environment independent, and they give you a degree of emotional autonomy. If you don't have those transcendent emotions, you're a bit of a puppet. Right, as events happen, you're going to be, the puppet pulls its strings, and how's your day? And will tell me about the things that happen in your day to create your current emotional configuration. The transcendent emotions give you kind of an oceanic stability that carries you through bad days and good days because they're transcending environment. So joy is a positive, is a transcending emotion. Well, what does that look like? So in my book, I use the definition of joy by the philosopher Robert Roberts, who defines joy as what he says is a concern-based construal. Okay, a concern-based construal. Okay, first of all, construal. It is a perceptual take on the world. We construe the word. It's dealing with a meaning making. So it's less about an emotion, but it's more about how I construe and understand this event. Secondly, it's concern-based. The construal, the meaning-making is deeply tied to my concerns and my cares, my deep investments. And so joy as a concern-based construal is, the way I describe it in the book is, interpreting the world or seeing the world through the things you care about. Right? So it's more perceptual rather than affective. So let me give you an example of this, of a joy as a concern-based construal, and why the concern-based construal, seeing the world through what you care about, gives you emotional resiliency. So again, I've mentioned I'm a prison chaplain, so I tell this story in the book. And the most anxious time being a prison chaplain is during the semi-annual lockdowns. During the semi-annual lockdowns, they do security checks. So the whole unit is shut down 24/7 for weeks on end. And so the men are confined to a very small cell, 2 men to a cell, and your 3 meals a day are brought to you in a paper sack. In Texas, they call them Johnny sacks, and it's like a bologna sandwich and an apple. So that's what they're given 3 times a day. So it's claustrophobic. You're dealing with your cellie, who may not be the most pleasant person to be in close proximity with. You're eating bologna sandwiches and apples constantly. And Texas prisons are hot, and they're unair conditioned. And so it can be stifling in there. Well, not a pleasant experience to be during lockdown. So I just, and because the program is shut down, we gotta wait until we get the call that the unit's back up. And so I just pray for their mental health, that they just survive it. They do okay. So we finally get the call, I go back out, and when I'm welcoming the guys back into the chapel, I just kind of take an inventory about how's everybody doing. How was your lockdown? Are you doing okay? And the answers are pretty predictable. It was terrible. I was going crazy. I never want to eat a bologna sandwich ever again. I was about to kill my celly. Normal things. And one day I tell a story where Mr. Kenneth comes in. Mr. Kenneth is a 70-year-old African-American gentleman, very wise. And I said, I'm worried about him because the heat stress. He's a senior citizen, and I'm concerned about his heat stress. Mr. Kenneth, are you okay? How was your lockdown? And he beamed. Face lit up. He says, I loved it. And I said, Mr. Kenneth, how can you love such an objectively horrible thing? And he says, I love my lockdowns because my lockdowns that's when I have my quiet time with Jesus. I don't have to go anywhere. There's nobody bugging me. I have to go to work. No officers messing with me. It's just me and the Lord. For 3 weeks. He had turned the lockdown into a contemplative retreat. It's him and the Lord, We pay thousands of dollars to go off to contemplative retreats, And he just turned his lockdown. Boom. He's with the Lord, And so here's my point. That's an example of that's an example of a transcendent joy. And he gets there. Instead of being triggered by the lockdown, is this is horrible. He's up here with joy because of the concern-based construal. The way he construed his life situation was, this is my opportunity to be with the Lord, and that gave him these joyful feelings over the course of those pretty grim 3 weeks. Okay. Awe. I mentioned this. Gratitude had its kind of moment in the sun. Awe is having its moment right now. Some of you guys might have been looking at some of the literature on awe. So what is awe? Well, awe is bumping into a reality that is bigger and other than your own. Okay? It's not in your head. It is a reality bigger and other than your own. Pretty reliable triggers for awe, obviously religion. Spirituality is a source of awe. Nature, obviously. Fascinating bit of literature. Do you guys know what the number one trigger for awe is? Most people think it's nature. And then you might think God. Okay, babies, that's true. Babies, life and death, right? The life and death go together. So life and death babies, love. Music is a part of it. Good food, okay. The number one trigger for awe is moral beauty, beholding love and kindness. When we behold moral beauty, it's like when a tragedy strikes, and then all of those stories go viral when we see other people helping other people, and you just feel kind of connected to humanity. There it is, our better angels come out, and I would argue that this is one of the things that moves us so much about Jesus in the Gospels. If you were here last night, I talked about how when I talked to Brad and I said I was kind of into Jesus for artistic reasons, I was pointing to his moral beauty. I don't know about you, but I find that beautiful and it moves me. And one of the triggers of moral beauty, not moral beauty, but awe generally, is it triggers what's called an experience of the small self. And the small self, and I think that's not properly named. I don't like it, but because I might describe it more as the relational or the connected self. But by small, they mean when you bump into that bigger, larger reality, moral beauty, faith or spirituality, standing before God in worship, love, music, nature. When I encounter the true and the beautiful and the good in those situations, I feel connected as a piece to a larger whole. So the small self there is more like a puzzle in a bigger peace, which is why I think it's better described as a relational self. I'm connected to something bigger than myself in those instances. What's fascinating about awe is it seems to have two interesting mental health benefits and social benefits. Number one, the small self is highly predictive of mental well-being, right? Like, just, it's healthy to have experiences of awe. And secondly, is predictive of pro-social, altruistic behavior, kindness, which very often in our current wellness culture are things that kind of point in opposite directions. Have you guys not noticed that? How in the wellness culture there is the concern for self-care, right? I've got to take care of my mental health, but often taking care of my mental health means kind of disentangling from the concerns of other people. And so we use mental health to kind of disengage from doing hard things because it's too upsetting and it's, messing with my positive emotion of joy. So I got to get away from the mess of the world. Or I throw myself into the brokenness of the world and try to do good things, and yet I suffer emotionally from the investment in the concerns and the brokenness of the world. And so it seems like I'm always pitting against ethical engagement and checking out with my self-care. Do you guys feel that tension in your life? Well, guess what allows you to do both? Awe, being a part of a bigger story. If you connect to something bigger yourself, you are both more loving and more engaged, and you're happy. Now you might go like, well, why do liberals suffer so much from, by the way, are you aware of this? Liberals have more mental health problems than conservatives. And I don't mean that to throw liberals under the bus, but I am saying, descriptively speaking, I think one of the reasons why is because a lot of post-Christian liberals do lack an ability to connect their ethics to transcendence. And a good example is like hope. If you have no, okay, so let's just assume you guys are all social justice warriors. Okay? Right? You're going to fight the cause. But you're also very disenchanted, don't believe in God. Okay? So you're on the realistic hope side. There is no pathway to the better world that you're aiming for. Not in your lifetime. History's a dumpster fire, and it's going to be a dumpster fire, and you're going to lose the next election, and the next one. Does this make sense? So you have the ethics, and you're banging your head against history, and you're just bloodying your face. Why? Because your hope is not eucatastrophic. You don't have a eucatastrophic hope. It is a realistic hope, and realistically, we're going to lose this thing. And so there's this burnout that happens where the engine of social justice, without the lubrication of hope and joy and peace, that engine's going to run hot and burn out. And so, let me be clear, I want to affirm the social justice impulses of my students, and in myself, and in you. Does it make sense? But my concern about the social justice impulse is it can't sometimes, because of its rejection of faith, can't get over to the transcendent joy, can't get over to the radical hope that is the sustaining infrastructure of radical compassionate engagement. Does that make sense? So I don't want to, if somebody's concerned about oppression, I'm for you, okay? But I also want you to be hopeful, and I want you to be compassionate, and I want you to also be a person of peace. I want all those things for you, So anyway, coming back to this, that awe seems to be like this magical solution to having pro-social engagement with good mental health. But you have to be connected to a bigger reality that is other than your own, to create those mental health benefits. Okay, goal setting is obviously a big part of therapy and good mental health hygiene, having goals and setting your goals. But I'm setting goal setting over there to kind of bring to your attention something called goal sanctification. Okay, sanctification theory by Pargament and Mahoney is the idea where we take a goal and we connect that goal to some sacred, cosmic, religious, transcendent purpose. To sanctify a goal. Not just set the goal, but connect the goal to a sacred ground. And right, so we take some aspect of our life, and it's not just that we're setting the goal, but we're connecting the goal to our larger purpose. Remember I said at the morning session, having a telos is really important. So let's say now you have a sacred purpose, a sacred telos, a reason for living. Okay, you got it? And maybe you just believe it axiomatically. I know I have it as just a proposition, but I can't see it and I don't feel it. So you think about your day-to-day, right? And I don't know where you're here, but let's think about tomorrow. Like, what do you got to get done tomorrow because you're sitting here today? You know, like I got to go write this paper, I got to go get my car registered, I got to change the oil, I got to do the dishes. Does it mean, like, can you all feel it? The anxiety as I blather on up here? It's like, now that you mention it, I should be doing something else other than listening to you talk. You know, I got to do, you know, and I'm doing this. You know what I'm saying? Like and a lot of that just feels like busy work, and it's overwhelming, and it's not very fun, and it just feels like a burden. Back to resonance, right? It's just a long list of hassles to get through. Goal sanctification says, let's take every one of those goals, even washing the dishes, and sanctify it. Sanctify it. Connect getting your oil changed, or checking your email, or doing the dishes. Connect it to the telos. Connect it to the sacred calling. Imbue the goal with sanctification. Okay, let me give you an example. Some of you probably already know this. You guys are fans of the books Every Moment Holy. Okay, if you've never seen these books, I highly recommend them because in many ways, Every Moment Holy is just a practice in sanctification theory. It takes all the things of life and creates a little liturgy or prayer, connecting it to your overarching purpose or telos. I love it. I read those prayers for my class all the time. I start every class reading an Every Moment Holy little liturgy. And I want to share one with you. So I picked one. I was like, what doesn't feel very sanctified? You know? And so I picked the liturgy for changing diapers. Okay, so here it is. So I want you to listen to this. But what I want you to hear in it is the sanctification and the teleological trajectory, connecting this task that seems unpleasant to transcendent, even eschatological ends, right? Changing the diaper, instead of becoming a chore, becomes a sacrament of value and becomes beautiful. So here it is, as just an example. Heavenly Father, in such menial moments as this, the changing of a diaper, I would remember this truth, that my unseen labors are not lost. For it is these repeated acts of a small sacrifice that, like bright ragged patches, are slowly being sewn into a quilt of loving kindness that swaddles this child. I am not just changing a diaper. By love and service, I am tending a budding heart that, rooted early in such grace-filled devotion, might one day be more readily inclined to bow to your compassionate conviction, knowing itself then as both a receptacle and a reservoir of grace. And so, this little act of diapering, though in form seems to be a base drudgery, might be better described as one of 10,000 acts by which I am actively creating a culture of compassionate service and selfless love to shape the life of this family and this beloved child. And so take this unremarkable act of necessary service, O Christ, into your economy, and let it be multiplied into that greater outworking of worship and faith, a true investment in the incremental advance of your kingdom across generations. Open my eyes, that I might see this act for what it is from the fixed vantage of eternity. There's the telos. Let me look at this act from that teleological end, O Lord. How the changing of a diaper might sit upstream of a changing of a heart, and how the changing of a heart may sit upstream of changing the world. And amen. So beautiful, right? That's infusing beauty and sacred purpose into a goal. I have to change a diaper. And that can be a drudgery or that can be sanctified. And so one of the things I do with my students as an activity, I will point them to every moment holy, look at the liturgies online, and I'll say, pick the worst part of your week. The part that you just don't look forward to. You're changing the diaper moment. And write me a liturgy to sanctify it. And it's really powerful for those students. And I will also say this, at the end of the class, I then have them write a life liturgy to sanctify their story. We talked before about coherence and purpose and mattering. So write a liturgy that sanctifies your story, sanctifies your purpose, sanctifies your value, and write a whole life liturgy. And that's become a really meaningful experience for my students. Here's my point, is you can practice, right? You can practice hope. You can practice cosmic gratitude. You can practice existential mattering. You can practice concern-based construal, right? Seeing the world through your ultimate cares or concerns, right? I don't want to leave you here, because we don't have tons of time, I don't want to leave you here with just a bunch of imperatives. But these are practices and habits and liturgies that we can move our way towards one side of this to the other side, even when we can't see it. And that brings me to my final point. Psychologists talk about this big in therapy, having a narrative identity, telling the story about your life. We talked about coherence. Pamela King out of Fuller talks about having what's called a transcendent narrative identity. It's basically what I just said. Take your story and connect it to the sacred. Connect it to bigger, more sacred goals. I mentioned this morning, when I talk about this with my students, I just use the size of your story. That's how I talk about that. So I say, if you have a very small story, then you're going to be very vulnerable, right? Like you're like walking into a battle with no armor. If your story's too small, you're going to be triggered. You're going to be co-opted by the dopamine economy. You know, your emotional life will not be in your hands. It'll be in the hands of the world. So I hope you guys have a good day tomorrow. But odds are it won't be, right? You're going out there defenseless, you know? Just you and your tiny little story going like, I hope things are going to be okay out there. And it's not, right? And so what do you got to do to the story you're telling about your life? First of all, you have to have one. My students often don't even have one. And then you got to get it big enough, right? A transcendent story. It gives you a degree of, emotional immunity, like Mr. Kenneth, capacities for self-transcendence. Something that anchors your value in the face of failure. One of the things I didn't put up here, because I didn't quite know where to put it, and I'm going to end on this, in my book, I do have a middle section on the virtues of humility. And because that's the other big thing in positive psychology, this whole literature on humility, humble leadership, and how like humility has all these mental health benefits, which seems strange if you grew up in a conservative church, right? Like if you think like, who would have thought that humility was like one of the secret keys to mental resiliency? Because a lot of us probably got the message that humility means like thinking like negatively about yourself. I describe it as like humility is like something you'd use in the Goldilocks game of your self-esteem project. Like, can you have too much self-esteem? You guys know Goldilocks, right? You can have too much self-esteem. You have a big head. You could be narcissistic, prideful. Can you have too little of it? Self-esteem, yeah, you can feel insecure. And so we're always playing this, like, how much self-esteem is, and nobody knows. You just kind of feel vaguely guilty. Some of us are, on the low side, and you're kind of like, you're probably too hard on yourself. Some of us are like on the top end, Probably need to be taken down a few notches. And so humility's that, right? It's, mortifying the ego. And you would think, why would that be predictive of mental health? And the answer is because that's not what so when positive psychologists went out there to study humility, they discovered that humility is actually a capacity for self-forgetfulness. It's called a hypoegoic state. This quote is attributed to C.S. Lewis, but it's not really his. But you've heard the quote, right? Humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. It's actually capacity for, like, the humble people they're not self-absorbed. They're not and that's why narcissism and insecurity share the same feature in being very self-focused. They're still entangled with the ego. And the humble people are just, as we just described, comfortable in their own skin. They don't need to impress, but they don't feel particularly embarrassed or shamed. They're just very, and that's why one of the biggest markers of humble people is just relaxation. They're just relaxed. There's nothing at stake in the social comparison games. They don't need to, perform themselves. And another sign of humility is that people are immune to ego threats. So, right, we have a self-esteem. It's pretty fragile, like a little egg, and then an ego threat will hit us. You guys know there are 4 main ego threats. Social comparison, which is why you should not be on social media. Social comparison triggers an ego threat. Rejection, okay? Failure, and what's the third one? Critical feedback, right? And so you think about your life and how reactive we are to. So who are the people? But humble people seem to not be very reactive to that. They can fail, and they go. They can be fallible. They can get critical feedback and go like, okay, that's good feedback. I enjoy it, but it's good feedback. They can be rejected, and they don't spiral into, into depression. They can look at other people's vacation photos and like, good for them. I'm glad they're having a good time. Or look at a marriage and go like, good for them. Not always engaging in relational comparison or economic comparison. Well, who are these people? Just pause for a second. The healthiest people in the world, right? Who are these people that can fail and go, most of us are neurotic basket cases if we fail or get critical feedback or get rejected, or we're really unhealthy. And humble people, and this is where I think, and if I had a chance to rewrite the book, I would argue that where does that come from? That non-reactive, stable, grounded identity come from? Is it humility? I think humility is a symptom of it. Does this make sense? I don't think humility confers that non-reactivity. I think humility is a symptom of it. What I think it is the transcendent narrative identity. These are grounded, in fact, that's why we use that word. They're grounded people, so secure in their identity in a transcendent kind of way that when ego threats come, they got deep roots. Does this make sense? If you got shallow roots, if you don't have a transcendent narrative identity, then yeah, those things hit you and your ego becomes very loud and noisy. Then you become very self-focused. So I think humility is actually a symptom of a grounded, transcendent narrative identity. So to kind of wrap this up very quickly, I'm at the top of this. I've put this quote in the last session about C.S. Lewis, Meditations of the Tool Shed. Instead of looking at the beam, looking along the beam. So let me suggest this is how transcendence relates to human flourishing. I want to suggest that we have a bifocal vision, okay? On the one hand, we could talk about hope and self-esteem and relationships and the things that give you joy, like chocolate. We could practice mindfulness, right? We could set goals. We could be satisfied with our lives. You could take the character strengths inventory and find out your character strengths. But I think that's only just so far. Positive psychology suggested that for every one of those things, there is something that pushes into transcendence. And asking our clients and ourselves and our churches to look not just at the beam on the left side, but along the beam on the other side, I think is the path forward. Because to look toward the transcendent horizon suggests that you got to be living in relation to the good or the beautiful. And so I'll end with this. I began the conversation with the conversation I had with Brad, and he was very disturbed about his faith, and I asked him, do you want to live a beautiful life? And I'll end with this. Years later, I got an email from Brad, and this is the email, which I'll end with. Dr. Beck, perhaps I'm being presumptuous in thinking that you might remember me. However, I was once your student, and in one of our conversations, you counseled me privately regarding the doubts I had about the existence of God and his role in the lives of humans. I can completely understand how you wouldn't remember this because it was like 5 years ago. I did remember him, though. You asked me what I thought a beautiful life looked like, and then you advised me to live accordingly. In the language of this, I was asking him to look along the beam of beauty at his life. He said, I'm not sure what your intentions were, if you had any that day, but whatever your intentions were, the time we spent together had a large impact upon me and eventually operated, changed the course of my life. Over the past few years, I've constantly reflected on the question of the beautiful life. And while I'm still in the process of that reflection, I've decided that for now that means dedicating my life to serving others. And for me, this means accepting a position with an NGO and moving out of the country. So I simply wanted to drop you a note, let you know that I appreciate the time and the counsel you gave me, and I hope that you will continue to share your time and your thoughts with those who seek your advice. Thank you, Brad. And so, my brothers and sisters, I will end with that question. Do you want to live a beautiful life? And if you do, you have to go out there and find out what that looks like. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.